Imagine being surrounded by thousands of meters of ocean waters. Away on an icy and hostile planet, you're surrounded by the crushing depths and monsters of incomprehensible size by a steel hull. That steel hull, your metal coffin, is your submarine. Barotrauma on the surface seems like a simple enough game. A fairly easy gameplay loop of going to stations, doing missions, and progressing. Yet underneath that surface of a simple gameplay loop lies an experience which you seldom get in games nowadays. It's a mix of chaos, terror, and downright stupid fun, which provides for a truly unique multiplayer as well as single-player experience. And today, instead of looking at the already widely discussed multiplayer, I'll be giving you guys an analysis of the single-player Barotrauma experience. How it feels when the only person you can rely on is yourself and not the god-awful AI. Today's video, I'm going to be telling you about the history of the game, as well as what makes it so unique, and something which is a cult classic in the community. So strap in, as we're about to dive deep into Barotrauma. So next we're going to spend some time discussing the history of Barotrauma, particularly the development history. It started off as a passion project for the Finnish developer Jonas Rikkonen, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, but from now on we're going to refer to him as his online alias, Regalis. This project was started in around early 2014, and it was inspired by games such as Space Station 13, Dwarf Fortress, Pressure, as well as Regalis' own game, SCP Containment Breach, another game which is extremely popular in the SCP as well as horror community. However, Barotrauma did not start off as Barotrauma. It started off as a game called Subsurface. It was never meant to be in the art style that we got it today, but instead a procedurally generated 2D simulation in which players would manage an underwater facility. And within 6 months of development of Subsurface starting, there was already a basic version with ragdolls, water physics, as well as a station module editor. However, in early 2015, Regalis decided to shift the setting from a station to a moving submarine, which allowed for a bit more dynamic as well as enhanced gameplay. And finally, in mid 2015, the game was rebranded to Barotrauma. Regalis says that this happened as he discovered the name while researching diving related topics for Subsurface. Soon after this, Regalis started an internship at the indie studio Fake Fish, where he continued working on Barotrauma on the side and during his free time. And not long after, in 2017, Barotrauma went through Steam Greenlight, and it received an extremely positive response and got greenlit in a record 2 weeks. Soon after, Regalis chose to release the game and the source code in 2017. However, this was done under a restricted license. His justification for making Barotrauma's code open source was that it helps him develop the game a lot better. This was similar to the approach that he took with SCP Containment Breach, which allowed the game to become the game that it is today. He claimed that allowing the community to contribute would not only allow the reporting of bugs and development of mods, but it would also expand his relationship with the people who buy the game. Soon after, Regalis finally established the single developer game development studio of Undertow Games, where he continued working on the Barotrauma project, and the game continued to see substantial growth up until 2023, where we finally got version 1.0 of Barotrauma, the first official release of the game. Between 2023 and October of 2024, when this is being recorded, the game has received multiple major updates as well as overhauls, with a PvP overhaul which came out only 7 days ago on October 22nd. It's evident that with this support and growth, Barotrauma will only continue to grow as a game, as well as in its popularity. Next, I'm going to go over every major role within a submarine crew. These roles can usually be selected at the start of the game and are usually made at your own discretion. For most roles, there can be an infinite amount of them depending on the crew size, except for captain. And while multiple people can technically choose the captain role, it's generally not advised to have more than one. So the first role that we're going to look at is probably the least important role, the assistant. The assistant is the nothing role. They have no responsibilities, they have no major skills, and they are usually relegated to AI that's meant to clean up stuff that's fallen out of its storage container. The assistant role was specifically designed for newer players in mind who simply want to test out the game's mechanics without having any responsibilities on the ship. If you're someone new and you don't really know how to play, the assistant role is recommended as it allows you to look at how things work without people screaming at you to do your job. The next role is another important role, the mechanic. The mechanic, as the name suggests, is primarily tasked with maintenance as well as fabrication and deconstruction of items. Maintenance involves fixing specific items, usually electrical ones, welding tools, and other such roles. Mechanics are usually used for repairing hull breaches or damages to the superstructure as a whole. Mechanics also have the important job of crafting things, which can be done at the fabricator, or deconstructing things from materials, which can be done at the deconstructor. Mechanics are also responsible for generally stocking the crew's supplies and making sure that everything is where it needs to be. No ship can run without a mechanic. In fact, no ship can run without any role, minus the assistant. The next role is also equally as important as the mechanic and is more related to the internal systems of the ship, and that's the engineer. The engineer's main job is to simply repair broken devices, things such as junction boxes, pumps, broken lights, fused doors, or any damage to any consoles have to be handled by the engineer. Engineers don't really do much other than operating the reactor, which is an extremely important job, as well as repairing junction boxes and other major electrical components. Engineers' workloads can depending on the intensity of the mission, and in some missions engineers don't really have to do much other than occasionally load and check the reactor, and in other missions engineers are being shouted at to repair every junction box which suddenly blew up in the ship. Engineers and mechanics both are able to effectively operate the deconstructor as well as the fabricator. The next role we have is the security officer. As the name suggests, the security officer is responsible for the internal security of the ship. Whether that means oppressing your own workers within the ship or killing intruders from outside, the security officer is the guy with the gun. Security officers usually operate weapons when the submarine is moving or go on board enemy pirate ships. Security officers also have the ability to use stun batons as well as handcuff crew members in case they're caught doing dissident activity. Security officers can either be some of the best people you meet or some of the worst, depending on how they're played. Next is another major role on the ship, and that is the medical doctor. The medical doctor can either be the most loved person on the ship or the most hated, depending on how you play them. Medics are obviously responsible for overseeing the health of everyone on the ship and ensuring that people who are coming back from expeditions gone wrong do not die on the floor. Medics usually don't have much to do until shit hits the fan, and when shit hits the fan, it really does, as medics are being called to every single compartment to repair someone with burns or someone with lacerations because they got hit with a railgun. Medical officers have a few main responsibilities. For starters, the most basic one is ensuring that everyone's health is in top shape. The second is developing antidotes to things such as husk infections, psychosis, and radiation. And third is operating their own medical fabricator to ensuring that they are staying stocked up on supplies. The final and arguably most important role, as it's the one I play, is the captain. The captain's responsibility is to coordinate and navigate the ship through the caves of Europa. The captain is also responsible for giving orders to the crew. This is less notable of a feature in multiplayer, as people should know what they have to do, but in single player, it can be used to command NPCs to do their delegated tasks. Captains are also responsible for buying equipment and items at the station, as well as setting wages. Captains are essential to running the ship, as they're the only one with the necessary helm skill to actually pilot the ship, and without the helm skill, the ship is going absolutely nowhere. So now that we've looked at all the major roles and the responsibilities, I'm going to take us through the major features of the game, as well as the ones that I think enhance the overall style of the game, before getting onto my own personal thoughts at the very end. So the first major feature is cities. Cities and outposts in Barotrauma are honestly very well detailed, and they have come a long way, as cities were only introduced around 2 years ago into Barotrauma. Cities are massive stations which are basically, as the name suggests, underwater cities. The lore of Barotrauma states that humanity had to escape Earth and they lost contact with Earth a very long time ago. Thus, humans have had to colonize and take over Europa and turn it into their own home. Cities are massive human settlements, and they are easily the best place to find supplies. Cities are extremely well detailed with multiple variations of rooms, multiple closets, multiple stores, and multiple people to interact with. Cities, in my opinion, are where the attention to detail in this game shines the most. Cities also provide a specific kind of feeling, that feeling of a decrepit and ill-maintained station, yet a station filled with some amount of hope and some amount of life. I think cities and the overall feel of stations, with them being run down, really enhances the feel that you get when playing this game. That feeling of hopelessness, yet there being a little bit of hope, that feeling of a rundown planet and a rundown people simply trying to survive. The next feature isn't really a feature in and of itself, but rather a core part of the game, and that is the art style, as well as the soundtrack. The Barotrauma art style is very gritty and grimy and dirty, which I think really enhances that feeling of the game. That feeling of being part of a rundown crew, of being rundown people, of a rundown species which has lost its home and is merely trying to find its way on a planet completely foreign to themselves. I think the Barotrauma art style really enhances the mood, the depressive feeling that you can get while playing this game, and the sounds. There's no real background noise when you're playing for the most part. Yeah, there's music, but that music isn't stand out. It feels like this music is part of your own head. It's a soundtrack to your thoughts. A soundtrack which is upbeat, yet also somehow down and depressing. The sounds of barotrauma aren't much better, but the sounds of your hull scraping against the ocean floor, the sound of the water rushing around you, and the sound of absolute silence when you're outside of the ship. Not only that, but the creature sounds are also greatly enhancing the experience and feeling of dread, and that's something I want to elaborate on in the next section, which is the next thing I want to talk about is another favorite feature, and that is the creatures of Barotrauma. I think Barotrauma has really good monster variety, and it really does enhance that alien feeling of Europa. The creature sound design as well as visual design is extremely good and extremely effective. I will never not get scared of seeing a massive ping on the sonar, or even worse, seeing something ping me back while I'm using my active sonar. Barotrauma creatures are easily some of the best designed ones I've ever seen, and my top three personally have to be obviously the Endworm, the Mudraptor, as well as the Hammerhead. These three creatures are exceptionally well designed and do come in some variants, which I am going to show on screen hopefully right now. But overall, Barotrauma creature and sound design is absolutely amazing. Now that we've discussed the basics of the game, your roles, and what I personally like about it, as well as the major features of the game, I want to talk a bit about the gameplay loop and my personal opinions about the game. The gameplay loop of Barotrauma is nothing special. It is a fairly simple quest system. You go from station to station, and at each station you can interact with NPCs and receive missions. Missions can correspond to a certain faction. The two major political factions of Barotrauma are the Europa Coalition and the Jovian Separatists. The Europa Coalition is the de facto autocratic superpower of Europa, and the Jovian Separatists are a democratic, quasi-terrorist group. Your missions can correspond to either those two or any of the other factions, the Church of the Honk Mother and the Church of the Husk. And the missions affect your standing with each faction. Missions are nothing special. They are mining missions for mining certain resources on the walls of Barotrauma's caves. They are creature killing missions in which you have to go and kill certain creatures, and there are simple transport missions in which you have to transport items from point A to point B. Yet, these missions aren't what give Barotrauma its experience, it's what happens between these stations is what makes the game interesting. Those moments of chaos, those moments of randomly being attacked, that feeling that you don't know what's actually out there past your sonar range. Anything can happen at any point, and it always keeps you on your toes. It keeps you tense. It keeps you waiting for the next strike. And that is why I find the gameplay loop of Barotrauma very interesting, because each cave system and each route you take is procedurally generated. So no two missions will ever be the same. Some will have a different type of enemy, some will have caves you can explore, some will have abandoned beacon stations that you can activate. The gameplay loop of Barotrauma is simple, yet simple is not bad. It is a type of simple which is extremely detailed and fun to play again and again. So now that we've talked about Barotrauma and its main features, its gameplay loop, and basic facts about it, I want to talk a bit more about my personal thoughts about this game. I love Barotrauma. I generally enjoy horror games and games which rely on the creepy side of things, and I do have a fascination with outer space and extraterrestrial life, and I think Barotrauma fulfills all of those niches. It gives me unique creatures to experience, it gives me a creepy yet fun atmosphere to play in, and if anything, it's a really good platform for storytelling. You can tell a story about your crew, you can tell a story about yourself, you can tell a story about the world around you, how you're helping certain factions, how you're not helping certain factions, what happens to them when you don't help them, and what happens when you do. Barotrauma provides a uniquely fun experience, and an experience which I honestly haven't seen replicated in any other game I've played up till now. I would highly recommend Barotrauma for anyone who has a love for the deep seas, anyone who has a love for horror, and anyone who has a even basic interest in these types of games. That is why I wholly recommend Barotrauma to all of you. And on that note, I'm going to leave you here to go and try the game out for yourself, and I highly encourage you to support the developer because he has done an amazing job crafting an amazing game. And on that note, thank you everyone. Have a good day.